I've been doing a lot of planning for my 2023 language learning journey, and primarily by setting goals. Now, I've already set my goals for Spanish and I've also set my goals for French. But in this video, I am sharing with you my combined goals for French and Spanish. Now, since I'm learning two languages at the same time, I can't just have separate goals for both of these languages. I have to combine them in some shape or form. So this will make sense pretty soon here. My first goal to learn French and Spanish in 2023 is not to repeat the same mistakes that I was making in 2022. So a lot of things I know for sure I need to improve upon. And some of those things are time management, creating study plans. I really need to increase my discipline a lot. I also need to increase my consistency and then also my motivation as well. Now, for my second goal, this is all focused on trying to find time to actually learn French and Spanish at the same time. So time distribution. Now, this is something for me that was incredibly difficult to do because this is the first time that I'm learning two languages at the same time. So it's a completely new experience for me. And I didn't really take the time to sit down and think about, how much time do I have to actually dedicate to studying both? I didn't really think of a really good strategy for that, especially because I'm so used to studying Spanish all the time, studying Spanish every single day for the past 2 years. And I'll say consistently, but I've been attempting to learn Spanish on my own for the past 3 years, although a little bit inconsistently. But overall, I've had a lot of struggle with switching off my Spanish mode and then going to French mode because I've worked so hard on trying to keep my Spanish mode on all day long. The other issue has been the fact that with me being a beginner in the French language, this is something I haven't experienced for a while. The last time I was a beginner in a language was with Spanish, and that was over 10 years ago. So I really don't remember how much time and dedication that it takes to actually learn a language completely from scratch. So I'm going through a really big learning process right now. Another goal of mine is to develop a mentality that is suited for learning two languages. And I say this because I've already adapted my mind to be able to learn Spanish consistently. But when it comes to adding a new language in the picture here, this becomes a lot more difficult. So for example, the amount of dedication that I need to learn two versus one language has to increase a lot more. My discipline has to be a lot higher as well. Consistency, motivation, time management, and just overall productivity. All that has changed. I have to figure out how to actually increase all these habits and skills with two languages. And it has been a challenge to say the least. This is also very important because just imagine that I had a really solid study schedule and I had a nice little planner that was all organized, highlighted, and colored. And I had all the resources that I needed to learn these languages. But if I didn't have a lot of discipline and consistency, then I wouldn't see that much progress in my language learning journey. My next goal is to use English as little as possible. And English is my native language. So I want to be able to communicate as much as possible in French and in Spanish in 2023. And one goal that I have to reach this goal is thinking in both languages. This is what I mean by combining my language learning goals. So I'm going to be thinking in Spanish and in French as much as I can throughout the day. So let's say that I think of the word casa or house in Spanish. I'm going to think right after that, what is the equivalent in French, which is maison or something like that. Don't make fun of my pronunciation with French because it's absolutely terrible. But this is my plan for me to be able to connect these two languages together and to be able to stay in Spanish and French mode as much as possible. Translating and interpreting in French and Spanish. Now, this is something I'm definitely going to be geeking out on a lot. So when it comes to translating, that means I'm going to be, let's say, reading something. Right now I have a website. I have a news website that is in Spanish. Let's say I'll be reading an article. Then what I'm going to do is get my sheet of paper here in my notebook, and then also a pencil. And then I'm going to write out or translate what that Spanish sentence or Spanish article is in French. Then I'll do the same thing with French. I'll open up a website, a news website in French, and then I'll read it in French, and then I will try to translate that into Spanish writtenly. And then with interpreting, it's kind of similar, but I'll be doing that by speaking. So let's say I'm watching a video that is in Spanish. I'm going to listen to that person who is speaking Spanish, but then I'm going to interpret that into French. And then the same thing, if I'm watching a French video, I'm going to listen to that French speaker speak, and then I'm going to interpret that into Spanish. At least that is the plan. And since I'm a beginner in French, I'm definitely going to have to increase a lot of my vocabulary, and also with Spanish, but definitely with French, because I don't know that many words at all in French. And to be able to interpret and translate, that requires a decent amount of vocabulary. Speaking of vocabulary, if you don't know yet, I am a lover of sticky notes and flashcards when it comes to vocab acquisition. So for Spanish and French, one thing that I like to do is write out the French word and the Spanish word on my sticky note. So for example, right here, I have the word room in Spanish and French. So la chambre, or something like that, la chambre, and then el cuarto. And then basically I just put this little sticky note on the door of my room, and that's how I can try to remember what that is. And then as far as flashcards, what I have been doing is on one side writing, let me find one real quick. Here we are. For flashcards, what I like to do is write the French word on one side. So this one is hier or hier. I don't know how to pronounce that. So hier, and then on the other side, I have ayer. So that helps me to, again, stay in French and Spanish mode without having to go back to English, and I can still increase my vocabulary because I already know a lot of Spanish words, right? So all I have to do is write the Spanish word on there so I don't have to use English. Toujours, siempre, prendre, tomar, okay, tomar, être, ser, pouvoir, poder, okay, faire, hacer, donner, dar. I can do something very similar using dictionaries for vocab acquisition. For example, let's say that I don't know what brush is in French. So I'll just go open up my French dictionary, then I'll go find the word brush. And here it looks like brosse or something like that, brosse. And then after this, I'm going to pick up my Spanish dictionary here, and then I'll look up what brush is here as well. El cepillo, cepillo. So then I just have right there being able to connect both languages really fast at the same time. Also, if you did not know, I love to read a lot. So I definitely plan on including reading as a part of my strategy for learning French and Spanish. Now, I have these two books here, short stories in French for beginners, and then also short stories in Spanish for beginners. So one idea that I have had is to read one section of one of these books. So let's say I take the short stories in French for beginners, and I read one or two paragraphs in this book. Then I go to this book, and then I read the same paragraph or the same sentences. And this is an idea that I got kind of recently because I never had two books that were the same in two different languages. So I think this would be very helpful for me as well to be able to connect these two languages together, and then also help for vocab acquisition, and then also speaking fluency as well. Another thing that I can do is open up my French book here and then read the first sentence in French. So, Daniel Ben me dit Julie de la porte de la maison. And then I can just try to think about what that would be in Spanish, and then also say it out loud without having to actually go to the book that is in Spanish. So, Daniel Ben, Julie me dice de la puerta de la casa. And there actually got mixed up a little bit because I was about to say la maison instead of saying la casa. So that happens a decent amount of times. I can also do something very similar with writing as well. So let's say that I write down the sentence, I am in my house, but I'm going to write that down in Spanish and then French. So in French, I think it is je suis dans la maison, something like that. And then right after that, I can just think of, oh, what would the Spanish version of that would be? And I think that one is estoy en mi casa. And then I can just go back and forth with that with different sentences or paragraphs or 5-paragraph essays or, whatever I would like to do. So that's something I'm also very interested in trying out next year. Thankfully, one of my friends sent me some different creators that were making content in French, but they were Spanish speakers. So this is something I would have never imagined that I would ever do. So in 2023, I definitely plan on watching a lot of YouTubers that are Spanish speaking, but they teach French. So I've been able to find a few of them actually, and this has been very helpful. So I definitely want to do that a lot as a part of my study schedule for next year. And I have to say that this will be a very strange but also a very rewarding experience because again, I am leaving my native language out of it, but I'm just staying in French and Spanish mode. So as you can see with my language learning goals for French and Spanish, a big theme is connection. I'm trying to make as many connections as possible in between both languages. And for me, I think this will make it a lot easier to learn both at the same time versus having them, super separated. I'm just learning them separately. I'm trying to isolate them because I think that will just be very hard to be able to do in general because I think my mind for the most part is always trying to make the connection because I already learned Spanish. But then by learning French, my brain is like, okay, these are two languages, so they somehow connect in some sort of way. So sometimes I actually do not have control of that connection in the first place. Another goal of mine is to not mix the languages. Now, of course, with these other goals, it seems like that's exactly what I have done. Now, with this, I've been asked by multiple people, how do I not actually mix these two languages together while I'm studying them? And at first, like at the beginning of this year, it was something that I never thought about. And because I didn't even know what exactly that meant, because since this is my first time studying two languages at the same time, this never really came into my mind, like trying to mix them together or what does that mean or how to separate them. I was just trying to learn French and Spanish as much as possible. But then it only took me one day to actually realize what other language learners were talking about when they were saying mixing the languages. So one day I was in my kitchen and I was thinking in Spanish. And then out of nowhere, just the French word voiture or car came into my head, but I was trying to think of the word carro in Spanish. So the French word crept into my head, but not the Spanish word. And then I forgot what the Spanish word was because I was thinking about the French word. So that made it very clear that, oh, that's what they were saying about mixing the languages. You actually just get really confused on what language that you're thinking in or that you're speaking in or something on the lines of that. From that day on, I started to have a lot more of these moments where I was mixing French and Spanish, whether it was when I was thinking, so I was thinking in Spanish and then, French came into my head, then I would forget Spanish, or with pronunciation. Now with pronunciation is very challenging for me because especially, let's say at the beginning of this year, right? I would open up my French book, but I didn't know anything about the rules of French pronunciation. So what I would do was read a sentence or a paragraph in French, but it was all in Spanish, mostly with Spanish pronunciation and Spanish accents and things like that. So I know for sure when it comes to my goals for next year, one of those goals has to be very focused on learning the differences between the pronunciation rules in both of these languages so I don't mix them up so many times. At first, I thought that this was not going to happen to me because I felt like a professional, with Spanish. I knew all the rules and things like that until I started to realize how many cognates that there were in between French and Spanish. For example, the word Spanish in Spanish is español. Now, the French word for that is very, very similar. So I would get those two mixed up a lot. And the same thing with transportation or transportación in Spanish. Like right now, I can't I can't separate those two. It's kind of very similar as well. It's like transportación in French or something like that. They're very similar, but I don't really know how to like which one I should say. So that is one. Another one is venir or to come in Spanish. And then in French, it's also spelled the exact same way, but it's just pronounced slightly different. Another verb is to know, and in Spanish, that is saber. But then in French is savoir, something like that. And then pensar in Spanish, which means to think. And with French, it's very similar as well. The only thing that's really changing is we have an E instead of the A, so it's penser. So a lot of these different things definitely had me confused when it comes to pronunciation. I've noticed myself actually have more French pronunciation when I am speaking Spanish. For example, there is one sentence like ¿Cómo estás?, which means how are you doing in Spanish. Now with the French version, you can say that as ¿Cómo vas-tu? And one thing I have noticed over and over again when I'm speaking Spanish is that I will say tu, which sounds more French, instead of saying tu in Spanish. So that's something that I do a lot. And the same thing with other letters too. I mix a lot of the French pronunciation with the Spanish when I'm saying Spanish words. And it is very, very weird. But I think overall, something like this is very inevitable and is something I can't always prevent from doing, no matter how many different pronunciation rules that I'm going to be learning, just because my brain is trying to combine and trying to separate both of these languages. It's just something that is just bound to happen. So I'm not going to stress too much about trying to separate them that much, but I definitely want to learn, what is the French pronunciation of things, what is the Spanish pronunciation of things, and the same thing with grammar. Making sure I know what the grammar is for French, and also making sure I know what the grammar is for Spanish, so I can try to separate the languages a little bit. Another thing I really want to do is really investigate and understand what are the best ways to learn two languages at the same time. Because I have some strategies right now, which I have mentioned throughout this video, but I feel like I'm just at the beginning of trying to grasp how exactly to do this. I'm sure there is many more methods for trying to learn two languages at the same time. So that's something I really geek out on and something I'm very excited for as well. Trying to figure out what are some different things that I can do to really push myself to learn these two languages. If you have any tips for me, please make sure that you share them in the comment section below, because I definitely need some more methods to learn. If you are searching for French and Spanish learning resources, I have some link down below in the description box of this video. Thank you very much for watching this video. Me llamo Josué, esto es Spanish Blueprints y nos vemos en el próximo video.